You know, sometimes everyone needs a little time to sit and think and to take a break from an overwhelming situation, which is why today we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts of kids sitting and thinking time, also known as timeout, because very often it is not used correctly. Hi out there. This is Dr. Brett Pearce, child psychologist, coming at you with a video on some guidelines with the use of timeout, which is to say, sit and think time. Yeah, I gotta show off whatever random toy or trinket I've got here. I've got a lot. We've got the a thinking gargoyle thing. I don't even know. So let's talk about timeout, folks. Timeout has become regarded as this kind of like big thing with helping kids who have misbehaviors or have tantrums and things like that. And just like anything and almost everything in life, there's no magic, it's not a magic wand, and any tool can be, misused for sure. So let's talk a little bit about what timeout is intended to be. Timeout is basically intended to be a few minutes, and for an older kid, maybe, 10, 15 minutes at the most, where kiddo gets a break from whatever situation that does not seem to be going well. And the intention is to allow kiddo to calm down and to maybe withdraw attention or whatever seems to be reinforcing the behavior. Timeout is, however, not a sort of catch-all or cure-all for all ills, surprisingly enough. And like a lot of behavior management strategies with kids, our intentions and kind of attitudes as adults can greatly influence its effectiveness. So the first big thing I want to talk about with timeout is that we need to use timeout as a support strategy and a sort of reset button, not a punishment. And very often what I find folks doing with timeout is there's a way where it becomes like, okay, well, I'm going to give you a timeout if you don't listen to me. And we use it sort of like this, like a punishment and a threat. And so almost paradoxically, I guess, we sort of create a self-fulfilling prophecy where timeout becomes used as this kind of display of power. Like, I can pick you up and put you in a room. I can make you go to your room when you really don't want to. And we end up charging the whole, use of something that's supposed to be just about an opportunity to calm down and a sort of reset button. We end up charging it with a lot of stress and frankly negativity, and we use it out of frustration. So one really good guideline for that is don't threaten it. If you're going to use it, use it. And you probably don't even necessarily want to call it a timeout. You can, I guess, but more like saying something like, hey, we need to take a break. And your intention there should be just, we need a reset button. A couple of examples of when that might be appropriate. Maybe you've got two kids who are fighting and out of control and screaming and crying and hitting and yelling. Makes perfect sense to say, whoa, hold on. We probably just need a break to settle down, because it can be very difficult to behave constructively when our feelings are flying through the roof. It's not really supposed to be a punishment in that situation, because then it becomes pretty much like any other punishment, where our intention is frankly to sort of inflict stress or pain or something like that, frankly, and to kind of exercise control and to display power, rather than to support, teach, guide, protect, connect, etc. So be really careful with that. Don't use it as a punishment. Don't treat it like a punishment. Don't threaten it. Certainly okay to plan for problems. Like, hey, if we're really, really struggling and we're really, we're beyond Thunderdome, as it were, with blowing up and having a big deal, then we're going to take a break. That's fine. So that way kids can kind of know that that's what we're going to do, but not as a punishment. Second big thing I want to talk with you about timeout. Timeout is not intended to replace other things. So just like any other tool, not all tools do all things. For example, if you want to hammer a nail, you need a hammer. You don't use a screwdriver for that, right? Even though hammers are awesome tools that do cool things for us, of course. Got a lot of things hanging around here that we're hung up with hammer and nail. So what I mean by this specifically is that if you find that your kid is struggling with a particular kind of situation, let's go back to kids fighting a lot. There is a lot of skill that goes into handling conflict with people close to you, with anyone, but especially with people close to you, where feelings get hurt very intensely and very easily. So let's list a few of these things. So there are emotion regulation skills, which are as important as they are sort of mysterious. There's just something about needing to choose to maintain control enough over feelings in order to be able to think and act with a level of clarity. There are verbal skills, like how to word things in a way that communicates your feelings and needs and wants and concerns clearly and succinctly, and also in as non-threatening and non-aggressive way as possible. Usually is pretty good in a conflict. There are negotiating skills. There are rule-making and agreement-making skills. There's lots of things that go into it. And I've worked in situations where kids were fighting really badly over a video game system. But even though these kids, they weren't, 2 and 3, they were like, 8 and 10 or something. So not exactly little, not exactly, teenagers yet, of course. But they just really didn't really know how to come up with a good system for how to share the video game system. And the situation was that they loved to hang out and play together, but they each wanted to play different games, and they didn't really know how to go about it. And so when I was helping them, I basically said, okay, here's what we're going to do. And I don't have it with me, but, I got out my phone and pulled up the timer and just said, group, we're going to agree that everyone gets a half an hour. And during your half an hour, you get to play what you want. You get to decide whether or not you're playing a game that your brother can play. That's totally up to you, but that doesn't change the fact that you only get a half an hour where you're in charge of the gaming system. And when the half an hour is up, it is up. It doesn't matter if you played by yourself or if you played with someone else. And this is just how we're going to go. Now, it's not like this magically solved all the problems. And they also needed an adult at least for starters, kind of like training wheels on a bike. They needed an adult to kind of regulate that. But then once they got it, they were able to carry it forward. And the only time timeout would have been useful in that situation is if things were getting so out of hand that everyone needed a break. Or if maybe one of the two brothers in this particular story was the one sort of instigating and freaking out. Because fights always involve two people, but it doesn't mean that they're 50-50 per se. I know, it gets complicated. So, because timeout doesn't really teach skills. Exactly. It doesn't teach us how to regulate feelings exactly. Sort of. It can maybe help us go, wow, when I go take a break and disengage from a situation and calm down, I can come back and be more effective. So that's nice. But it certainly doesn't teach negotiating skills, doesn't teach conflict management skills, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can pretty much apply that to any problem that a kid is running into. If a kid really hates homework, half because maybe they're struggling with the subject matter, half because they're exhausted and stressed out, half because they've got a listening problem with authority, timeout isn't going to just magically address all of those things, right? So that's the second big thing about timeout. Timeout's a great tool, but it's not the only tool. And a lot of managing behavior with kids means we need to learn how to be good teachers, which means that we think about where is the kid at, what are they really struggling with, and how do I meet them with where they're at, and focus on what they seem to be struggling with rather than, focusing on what they're not struggling with or something like that. So the third thing to understand about timeout is that timeout doesn't necessarily need to be a total withdrawal of any and all adult presence. And for For some kids, timeout is just way too devastating. And these kids are usually kids who struggle with things like depression or anxiety, regulating their feelings in general, particularly kids who are very sort of social and intimate and connected and really like being around people. You have to be very careful with it, because sometimes timeout just inherently for those kids, it's way too activating, and frankly, it's just too punitive. Almost always. It doesn't mean that if you yourself are also getting really upset and need a break, that it's not perfectly appropriate to tell kiddo, okay, I need you to be in your room. I need to go take a break for just a few minutes and I'm gonna come back and we're gonna work this out together. But for many kids, particularly, kids who are struggling, and also certainly very young kids, timeout can be more like a time in, I've heard it called, where there's more of like a bringing in, taking a break, but we're physically together, and it's even perfectly fine for many kids, depending on the exact context, for there to be a lot of closeness, a lot of affection, kids on someone's lap, or kids getting a back rub or something. Obviously it gets really complicated and it's hard to give you like just a sweeping guideline. But in many, many cases, hundreds, with kids who have dearly struggled, I've found that one single tweak where we sort of stay present and are gently trying to just provide soothing really, really, really helps. And many folks would come back and say, well, you're going to reinforce things. That's a really big oversimplification, and it focuses only, again, on just one variable. Because sometimes kids just need a lot of extra help and support, particularly from mom and dad, whoever's taking care of them, to regulate their feelings. And closeness really does help to regulate feelings. It even has effects on biologic markers like cortisol levels and blood pressure and things like that. So bottom line is, timeout's a wonderful tool. You hear about it a lot, but it can blow up in your face. And it can blow up in your face if you're using it like it's a punishment, which is not what it's supposed to be. It's not what it was ever intended to be. It can blow up in your face if you're only using timeout and we're not thinking about, well, what needs need to be addressed here? What skills need to be learned? What supports need to be put into place? And then finally, it's just really important to understand, third, that there's plenty of kids where timeout, as in they're alone in their room, particularly when they're already really upset and struggling, it's just not going to go well. Why? Because maybe the kid is needs to be close in order to regulate, whereas some people, kind of myself included, often need to be alone in order to do that. And different people, including kids, are different. So again, timeout's wonderful, but it's not magic. And so just be aware of how, when, why, and with what kid you are using it, and things will go better. So thank you for listening. This is Dr. Brett Pearce, child psychologist, about to sign off. Please do consider subscribing to the channel. It really does help out, and each of you mean a lot to me who subscribe and watch the videos. Please stay safe out there and be careful with timeout. Thank you. Bye.